Guess what? Garmin just got running power from the wrist with no sensor required. Let's talk about it. Well, hello there. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Dave from Chase to Summit. In today's video, I'm going to talk about a new firmware update. Right now, this firmware update is in alpha stage, which means it's not qualified for the new beta program from Garmin. So it means you can't automatically download it to your watch. You need to go ahead and go to the Garmin website, download the files, manually drag them over to your watch over a USB cable, which is kind of clunky and old-fashioned, but it is what it is, and it's the only way to get these features right now. So currently, this firmware update only applies to the Garmin Fenix 7, 7S, 7X, the Epix Gen 2, and the new Garmin Enduro 2. All of the other models will be coming down the road. I think that includes the Tactic 7 and a few other models, but that's what it is right now. So what's included in this new firmware update, and why am I outside talking to you right now? Well, there's a few things. First of all, there's the new auto rest timer that we got in the Garmin Enduro 2. If you want to learn all about that, go check out my review video that I'll link up at the top of your screen. There's also the new next fork navigation feature from the Enduro 2. On top of that, we also get the new morning report that was featured on the Garmin Forerunner 955, which is a really cool feature and highly requested on the Fenix 7. On top of that, this firmware update also includes grade adjusted pace, which basically takes your running when you're running up and down hills and tries to give you an idea how fast you'd be going if you're on flat terrain. You've seen this on Strava before and on the Garmin Enduro 2 as well. And aside from those key features that excite me, there's also a handful of other features like new activity profiles for sailing, a bunch of bug fixes, etc. And the list is really long. I'm not going to go through everything in this video. I just want to talk about the one thing I really care about, and that is the inclusion of wrist-based running power from the wrist itself with no additional sensors. Now, previously on the Garmin Fenix 7, the Epix Gen 2, and all the other watches, you would need an external sensor like the Garmin HRM Pro or Pro Plus. I'm actually wearing the Pro Plus right now under my shirt, which is a additional sensor that you pair to your watch to get that running power metric. And I'm sure if you've been around and you've seen the competition, you've seen watches like the COROS Pace 2 and even the new Apple Watch Ultra, which have running power natively out of the box and do not need an additional sensor. A lot of Garmin users have been waiting for this feature to come to Garmin because everybody else is doing it. Polar, you've got COROS, you've got Apple, they're all doing it except for Suunto. But now I'm happy to announce that this is included on the new firmware update on the Fenix 7, Epix Gen 2, and Enduro 2. This is very exciting. So you might be wondering, if you're watching this video, what is running power? Well, basically, it's an additional metric that's recorded by your watch that allows you to understand your effort level at a given time. So if you're running up a hill, you'll be exerting more energy than you would be if you're running down a hill. Running power is measured in watts, just like a light bulb. So if you're running up a hill, you'll have a higher wattage than if you would if you're running down a hill. Okay, now that I've got the details out of the way, I'm going to head out on my first run to compare this new wrist-based running power on my Garmin Epix Gen 2 against some other devices. All right, you can see I've got the Stryd pod being recorded to my iPhone 14 Pro here with the current power output. I've also got the Epix Gen 2 showing power output as well, the COROS Pace 2 recording power output, and of course got the Apple Watch. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, I also have the Garmin Forerunner 955, and that's paired to the Garmin HRM Pro that I'm wearing under my shirt to get running power from that sensor as well. It appears I'm talking to Siri. All right, now I'm gonna run. Oh boy, it's starting to look like fall around here. The trees are changing. Yeah, it's kind of pretty, but also kind of depressing. All right, so I just finished up my first run with the Garmin Epix Gen 2 and the new beta firmware 10.33 with running power from the wrist. And I just took a look at the data and analyzed it and compared everything side by side in a graph. So what are my initial thoughts and observations about the data coming from the Epix Gen 2 with the new beta firmware? Well, it's a little bit interesting. So if you look at the graphs, you can see that the Apple Watch Ultra, the COROS Pace 2, and the Stryd pod all look pretty similar in terms of their wattage values. They're all kind of in the same ballpark. And again, their trend lines are all pretty similar as well. However, the Apple Watch Ultra does something weird when I started to walk during my intervals of this run. So when I walked, you could see that the Apple Watch Ultra does not record any data at all. There's big gaps in the data in between the points where I'm walking and then when I start running again. I don't think this is a huge deal, but this is something I have noticed used in the past on Apple devices. Now, if we go and compare the Garmin HRM Pro, which is the chest strap that was paired to the Forerunner 955, and the Epix Gen 2 with the beta firmware, you can see that, again, they look very similar. However, their values are much higher in terms of the numeric value compared to the Stryd Pod, the Apple Watch Ultra, and the COROS Pace 2. This doesn't really matter. So if you don't know, the running power metric is relatively new. It was just introduced a few years ago, and because of that, there's no standard out there yet. No one has standardized the metric, so everybody's doing it a little bit different. 300 watts on a Garmin equals something like 200 watts on a Pace 2, which is kind of weird, but it is what it is. However, where this does become a problem is if you're a hardcore Stryd Pod user, for instance, and you want to use the running power from the wrist on the Garmin when you don't have your Stryd Pod on you, the values just won't line up at all, which can be very confusing. So if you are a Stryd user, it is beneficial to use something like the Apple Watch Ultra or the COROS Pace 2 because they're all kind of similar. With that said, let's kind of zoom in and compare the Garmin HRM Pro to the new Garmin Epix Gen 2 with the firmware update. And when you look at the running power from the wrist compared to the sensor on my chest, they are a little bit different. I do think I'm getting better information from the HRM Pro Plus than I did from the Epix Gen 2, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because my wrist wobbled around a little bit because it's using the sensors in the watch, like the gyroscope and the altimeter and stuff, to get this data. They're not apples to apples just yet. They're not identical, but they are similar. And I do think the trend line from the Epix Gen 2's running power is pretty similar to something like the Stryd Pod as well. You can see in my intervals when I peaked in effort that the Stryd Pod and the Epix Gen 2 both show the same peak, even though the numbers are a little bit different. Okay, so what are my final thoughts on my first impressions of the running power from the wrist on these Garmin devices? Well, I think it's a step in the right direction, and I'm hopeful, because this is a beta rollout right now, that things will get polished, and by the time it gets to a production level and it's out on a bunch of watches, this will actually be really useful. And I do think as a first attempt on this, a first stab at it, they did a pretty good job, and I'm pretty excited to use this moving forward. However, keep in mind this is a beta update and you're using it at your own risk. I wouldn't put this on a device that you're planning on running an ultramarathon with tomorrow because it may fail you. It is beta, it's not promising, it's not even beta, it's alpha. And now I want to hear from you. Are you updating your Garmin to get running power from the wrist? Let me know in the comments down below. Let me know your experience with it, how it's working for you. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, if you found this video helpful, fun, educational, anything, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing down below so you don't miss more videos from me in the future. That'd be great. And I'll see you next time. Bye.